Last week, I had to endure a grueling 17-hour drive to North Carolina for a wedding. It was an exhausting week, and we found ourselves rushing from one family gathering to another. During our stay, we lodged in a motel, and we had been at this place for a few days by the time the wedding day arrived. The day of the wedding was chaotic, with us scurrying around to get ready for the venue. My husband was ready before me, as he needed to tend to some last-minute tasks before we left. This left me alone in our motel room, trying to get ready without sweating in my nice dress due to the brutal heat outside. The layout of this motel was a bit unusual, with the sink and mirror in the general open area of the room and the toilet and shower in a separate room. This arrangement meant that anyone passing by our room window could see me standing in the mirror. Even though I had the curtains closed, they were somewhat sheer, allowing the shadow of someone walking by to be visible on the outside, or potentially the silhouette of me inside the room. As I was curling my hair in front of the mirror, I noticed the silhouette of a man passing by my room window. To my surprise, he stopped and started trying to look into my window. Initially, I thought it was my husband checking if I was ready, so I paid little attention to it. However, as the guy continued to stand there and persistently tried to peer through the curtains, I began to realize that it couldn't be my husband, as he could have simply walked in. My anxiety was growing. Before I could react, the man started moving towards my room's door. My shock and horror peaked when he managed to open the door and entered the room. My husband had forgotten to ensure the door was properly locked when he left, and he was genuinely upset with himself when I later told him about it. Now, I was face to face with this tall man, at least 6 feet in height, standing in my room. I thought to myself, this is it. He's going to attack you. It's a terrifying realization to have. I also considered the possibility that I might have to defend myself with the hot curling iron I had in my hand. For a few seconds, it felt like an eternity as he stood there, staring at me as if I were prey and he was a starving predator. Then he began to smile, revealing the most malevolent, toothy grin I had ever seen. He started mumbling something under his breath, and although I couldn't catch all his words, I did hear "pretty lady" and "come here." Suddenly, something inside me switched from fear to anger. I charged toward him, brandishing the hot curling iron, and screamed as loudly as I could, "Get out of here!" This seemed to startle him, and he quickly retreated to the motel's balcony. Seeing this as my opportunity, I ran for the door and managed to slam it shut just in time, preventing his second attempt to enter. I remained on the floor, sobbing and too frightened to move until my husband returned about 15 minutes later. I recounted the entire ordeal to him, and he was as freaked out as I was. While he initially wanted to confront the intruder, I insisted that he stay with me. We reported the incident to the motel's management, and the police were called. I described the man in the hopes that they could identify whether he was a guest at the motel. After questioning the other occupants, they determined that no one matched the description, concluding that he wasn't a guest. Sadly, the incident made us late for the wedding and cast a dark shadow over what should have been a joyous occasion. We had originally planned to stay another day, but decided to leave as soon as possible, skipping most of the reception. This experience served as a stark reminder of the importance of always locking your doors, even when you feel safe, as it only takes one lapse to invite an unwanted guest. When I was about 10 or possibly 11 years old, my mom found a job as a live-in manager at a quaint little motel at the edge of our town. We packed up and left our childhood home to move to the motel. Our initial experiences were far from pleasant, as the house was in a terrible state. filled with holes and unpleasant odors. We later discovered that the previous manager, Steve, was involved in drugs, and his wife was manufacturing and dealing meth on the premises. After a couple of months, we managed to make the place more livable. At this point, my mom was working full-time at the motel's front desk, which was situated in our living room, a tiny and cramped room with just the desk on one side and a door on the other leading to our living area. Many people, without hesitation, would open that door, catching a glimpse of whatever video game my brother and I were engrossed in. This situation was unnerving, and the motel's checkered past attracted meth users who came by searching for Steve, often refusing to believe my mom's explanations that he no longer worked or lived there. One summer, during my summer break from college, I decided to stay up all night playing video games. I created a little nest in the living room, settled in, and started enjoying my games. Around 1 in the morning, after hours of Skyrim, I began to hear strange noises. Usually, my mom would leave a key in an envelope for late arriving regular guests. However, this practice had an unintended consequence. People would attempt to enter the living room as if it were a common area. On this particular night, I heard voices sounding like two men speaking in an unfamiliar language. I assumed they would leave shortly, but they didn't. They continued talking for a while, and I became uneasy. The talking escalated into someone trying to open the door, initially gently, as if testing it, but it grew more frantic, accompanied by grunting. Eventually, it turned into full-blown banging on the door. At that point, fear gripped me, and I felt utterly defenseless. The banging stopped, and after a few seconds, I heard tapping on the window behind the front desk. I cautiously peered from behind the curtain and saw a man trying to break into the window. Simultaneously, I noticed movement at the screen door in the kitchen, and panic consumed me. It seemed like the man from the front door had circled to the screen door, while his accomplice was prying at the window. The man at the screen door jiggled the doorknob, and after a brief pause, he resumed banging on the door with even more intensity. Despite my fear, I decided to take action and tried to sneak into the little office connected to the front desk. There, I discovered a key drop off, essentially a hole in the wall. I lifted the flap with a pencil and glimpsed two more men standing at the door with their hands in their pockets. They appeared to be waiting, and it dawned on me that they might be trying to surround the house. Frightened, I closed the key drop off, and the hallway light suddenly turned on, and my parents emerged, looking visibly distressed. My dad turned on the kitchen light and shouted, "What the hell?" All the noise stopped, and the intruders fled. I felt a mix of relief and terror during that moment. After I recounted what had happened to my parents, they called the police, who arrived about an hour later. The incident didn't appear to have happened to anyone else in town, but the police seemed to believe that the intruders might have been seasonal workers from a nearby hops farm, potentially not understanding that the motel was closed. To this day, I'm haunted by the unsettling events of that night, never fully understanding what their intentions were and how much danger I had narrowly escaped. In the summer of 2004, I was on my first college break, having just completed my freshman year. I was missing my college friends and the freedom of being away from home. One Saturday night in July, a college friend named Julianne, who was from out of town, was having a birthday party. She invited a bunch of friends to a motel room to celebrate with drinks and socializing. I had only recently started driving during my freshman year, so I was still somewhat naive. People often perceived me as friendly and somewhat helpless, which frequently led to strangers attempting to engage in conversation or offer assistance, even when I didn't need it. I was excited to attend Julianne's motel room party, which was held at Motel 6, located outside the downtown area, near a declining shopping mall. The choice of the motel puzzled me, as it wasn't conveniently close to our college or anything interesting unless Julianne had plans for shopping the following day. When I arrived, it was late in the evening, and the motel's parking lot had only a few cars. I went up to the second floor, where Julianne's room was situated at the corner near the entrance to the parking lot from Frontage Road. Inside the room, there weren't many people, and it resembled a typical motel room featuring 2 queen-sized beds, a bathroom, and a TV. I grabbed a beer, took a few sips, and quickly realized that the atmosphere was somewhat dull. My usual college friends weren't present, and we weren't engaged in our usual activities. Normally, my boyfriend and his roommate would be hanging out, watching a peculiar movie, or having stimulating conversations. This time, it was a more standard gathering with people talking and drinking, which didn't match my preferences, given my introverted nature. I began to feel uncomfortable and sought a way out. So during a lull in the conversation, I told Julianne and her boyfriend, John, that I needed to leave. They accompanied me to the door, and we exchanged goodbyes while standing on the balcony, overlooking the parking lot. As we chatted, a taxicab pulled up to the motel, stopping directly beneath the balcony where we stood. I glanced down as a man emerged from the back of the cab, but what immediately alarmed me was that he gazed directly up at me, staring with an unsettling expression. He didn't have any emotion on his face, and he made no move to proceed to his destination or pay the cab driver. The cab departed, leaving him standing there, still staring up at me. Slowly, he began to smile, but his smile was profoundly creepy, and it felt as though he knew he was causing me distress and was deriving enjoyment from it. Simultaneously, it was as if no one was home behind his eyes. He looked at me as if I were the only person in existence, and as though he was somehow expecting me, as if it were his sole purpose for the entire night. This unnerved me deeply, but then he walked away. We joked about the strange encounter, and I made my way to my car. I unlocked my car, placed my purse on the passenger seat, and just as I did so, a car pulled up right behind my vehicle, blocking my exit. I turned to see that the man from the cab had his car and had followed me to where my car was parked. He parked his car directly behind mine and continued to stare at me, maintaining the same eerie smile but displaying no other signs of self-awareness. The only instinctual reaction I could muster was to run back to the party, despite leaving my purse in the passenger seat and my car door unlocked due to my heightened fear. I knocked on the door, and John and Julianne joined me on the balcony, confirming that the man's car was still present. We called the hotel's front desk and requested that the security guard accompany me to my car. The security guard arrived, an overweight individual who appeared discontented with his assignment. He knocked on the motel room door, but didn't offer to escort me. Instead, stood on the balcony, looking down. Feeling frustrated with the situation, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Since the creeper's car was no longer visible, I darted down to my car, started it, and sped away before the man could reappear. I paused briefly in my car to make sure John made it back to the room safely before I left. My doors were locked, and I was ready to make a hasty escape. Though the incident might not seem significant, the man's unnerving behavior, particularly how he looked up at me upon exiting the cab, left me deeply unsettled. It felt as though he had come to the motel for the sole purpose of finding me. He couldn't have seen me from his seated position in the cab, making the incident even more peculiar. To this day, I carry a knife in my car, but I'm aware that it might not be the best form of protection.